Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Sunday night's Unlock the Middle Videocast, where we bring authors, teachers, people in the field of education to the forefront, and we actually explore what they can bring to our table. Tonight, we'll be streaming live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Periscope. Please feel free to join in with any comments as we continue down the road of tonight's show. My name is Dean Packard. I'm the principal of Charlton Middle School, and alongside of me, I have my good friend and co-host, Principal Chris Starcheski of Dudley Middle School. Chris, how are you tonight, my friend? Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. Hope you had a great break. How are you?
Happy Thanksgiving to you too, Dean, and everybody out there in Unlock the Middle Land. You know, it's been a nice weekend. I shut down as early as I possibly could on Wednesday and tried to stay away from work as best I could to keep myself recharged and rejuvenated, ready to hit the road to work tomorrow. It was just a really fun weekend, a lot of family time. We decorated for Christmas a little bit ahead of December 1st, if anybody's out there with a rule, but got the holiday spirit flowing, and we're having a great time. How about you, Dean?
Hey, there's no rule to when you can do this. And I'll tell you what, Christmas can come on anytime that you want. Hey, while we're going on tonight, if you get a chance, give us a quick shout out where you are, where you're watching from, as our viewers are watching before we get started. Chris, you know what? Every family is a little bit different with that. I know that my wife has really started putting the house together, and our son's home, which is really good. So it's been fun. It really has. So we're really looking forward to seeing what the next month brings, especially in our schools. Our schools right now are really, they're on the edge, and it's just very difficult because we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, coming down, there's so much unknown, yet there is known, and the known is primarily dealing with adversity and responding and taking action to move forward. One of the things that we've got, ahead of us, though, is really preparing for new schedules and new experiences as the year gets deeper. And it's exciting, but it's challenging at the same time.
Well, you know what? One of the things that are really fun is that we've been doing this now since July. Hello there from Pennsylvania. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. We get to meet so many great people, so many talented people. And our topic tonight is really interesting because it leads to inclusivity within schools. And one of the things that you and I both pride ourselves on is making sure that every child that comes through the door feels as though they are part of the learning environment. And I'll tell you what, especially being at a middle level, that's oh so important because that mindset triggers the ability for everybody to learn. I'm sure you agree with that.
The idea of inclusivity is really important, Dean. It allows for us to really focus on the individual experiences and needs of people, not just kids. We want everybody to be a part of the learning community and be able to extend their own experiences, their own self, and have influences on others, be exposed to others. We don't want cookie cutter people, but we do want great ideas to be shared. We want people to act with civility and respect. And we want people to be kind humans. And, for us, really that's what inclusivity, allows us to focus on.
Well, and in my school in particular, Chris, we have a classroom and two programs that are set up for children with autism or it's cognitive delays and things of that nature. And we want to make sure that all those kids are treated as well as anybody else. And even though that they might have some delays and a little bit behind at times, they are still part of our school culture. And we're not only talking about from an IEP standpoint in that capacity, but we're talking about cultures. Mm-hmm. We're talking about everybody has the right to feel respected and part of a school. And that is the beauty of where I sit and see that so much work continues to happen. And when those kids get off the bus, we want that smile from ear to ear. I don't care what it is. This is their home. This is their place. And this is where they belong.
Well, hey, what do you say we bring our guest in tonight, Dean, and get down and dirty with the idea of inclusive practices and the idea of inclusivity beyond the IEP as well? Because I know we're going to hit that. We're going to hit that pretty hard. We also have an opportunity to get into a little bit of dialogue with our guest about her children's book and how it really does focus on children and the idea of inclusion. So why don't you bring her in? And
I'll bring her in and do the honors. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody out there. We've got Maggie Fay who's joining us. Maggie Fay is a public school educator for students with autism and developmental disabilities. She's passionate about inclusion and leading through an equitable lens. Maggie's been invited to speak about breaking down barriers by various organizations and has been part of the CHCH Morning Live show. She's written the children's book Hallway Connections, which is about two boys who meet a girl with autism and learn that we all communicate differently. I'm looking forward to getting into that book towards the end of our video cast this evening with Maggie. Maggie, welcome, and how are you?
Thank you. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm great.
Welcome to our show. Chris and I are excited to have you here. And, we want to talk a little bit about what you bring to the table, Maggie. So why don't we just start off right out of the gate? What is inclusion? Talk to us about your perspective of what that means.
So I feel it's a word that a lot of people throw around without really unpacking of what it means and how it affects your school culture. So inclusion, I talk about it from the perspective of special needs, but inclusion is so much bigger. Like you were hitting on, it's our people of every race, culture, background, no matter who you are they included, not just as a checkbox, which I'll get into later, but really feel like they're part of the school culture, like they're fully immersed in the programming and the curriculum development. They feel that they have a voice. Regardless of your ability, you feel respected and valuable. And that's really encompassing whether or not you're the student, the teacher, any educator, any staff member in the school.
Tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you do on a daily basis, because that'll lead into the discussion.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from Milton, Ontario, Canada, your first international one. So that's pretty cool. And then I am a public school educator. I teach children with autism in a contained classroom. So what that means is I have 6 students in my classroom. Right now it's different with COVID, 3 educational assistants, and these children have an exceptionality of autism along with developmental disabilities. And we create I always say we run 6 programs on a daily basis. Each child brings different needs, different strengths, and we focus on raising their needs up to the strength model. And really it's about making their pathway for success as individualized as possible. There's some overlapping goals that we focus on, but really it's a differentiated program meeting their needs as best as possible and giving them the voice, even though they don't have, I've never really liked the word nonverbal because yes, you don't, I always like to say you don't use words to communicate, right? Because communication is so much more than just words. Even nowadays with kids sending emojis half the time, like you know what you're saying without having to use a word. So to me, it's really allowing every student, no matter how they communicate, to have a voice in my classroom.
So Maggie, as you sit back and think about the ideas of inclusive practice or the ideas of inclusion in a whole school environment, what are some of the barriers that exist, and how do we shift mindsets to integrate more inclusive practice?
Yes, I think you really hit it on in terms of shifting a mindset. I think we really need to unpack our conscious biases. Like what are we really bringing to the table, and what is that barrier? Are we, for example, afraid, which is a very valid feeling to have when students are not acting maybe the way that regular students, I put that in quotations, whatever that might be, are behaving. So we tend to put them, well, they're not meeting the curriculum the way I need to. I don't know how to address them. You go ahead and handle that particular student. And I think we need to just kind of take a pause and say, well, why? What is holding you back? Is it the fact that you need to feel more supported as a teacher? Do we need to have more PD on providing programming for students with ASD? Especially during COVID, teachers have so many stressors already. And now we're adding students with IEPs in there who cannot sit in a 40-minute session. So it's how do we address that? And actually, that's something that I'm doing with my school right now is how do we address those students? Because they're still your student at the end of the day. Right. So coming up with creative strategies of Google Slides, again, which address their IEP goals, but at the same time, maybe having them attend breakout rooms or have the EA do a breakout session. Or honestly, sometimes you need 5 different tabs open in order to keep their engagement going. So trying to kind of bounce back and forth. I know that it's not typical programming, but you need to keep their interest. When I teach my students with ASD online, I have literally 4 to 5 tabs open, and every 3 minutes we're progressing through a different activity. So what that means is shifting your mindset towards understanding that these students need a different type of programming to be provided. But shifting your mindset also means that you need to feel supported by everybody else in your school and be, I guess, empowered to be able to voice the fact that you're afraid of not being able to address some of these kids. Because it is very different learning right now, right? That we're all experiencing.
Being able to take that risk and extend, your capacity, and to be able to take that chance and that idea that, listen, I don't have the answer this time about how to get an entry for this particular student, but I know it's worked for thousands of others. What can I do differently for this child in front of me? That mindset is hard to overcome sometimes.
You know,
and it's okay to admit that. I think, especially during the times, we need to have more courageous conversations, not only around diversity and equity, but I think that stems right into what we're discussing right now is inclusion. We need to have courageous conversations of how do we include students who are falling through the cracks right now, who might not be addressed. For example, my classroom started off with the baby gate, which made me very uncomfortable, because as you walk by that classroom, a lot of the kids are like, I'm not going in there. There's a baby gate at that door, which means, why are you keeping those students away from me? In no means, shape, or form was it a bad strategy to use. It was for the safety of a student who was a runner. But what we need to look at these children is the world is not gated. So if we're going to put these barriers into place, that's already a mindset that you've accepted, is that you have to keep them inside a classroom. But if you remove that barrier, now you have to really dig a little bit deeper and come up with creative strategies on how to keep them in your classroom and keep them engaged and what you can do. But now your classroom looks inviting, right? It may be more typical for a kindergarten class to have a barrier, but then if you translate those barriers into your attitude, like your attitudinal barriers, and shifting it from a medical model to a social model, and that shift is, I think, what we need to start looking at, is shifting our mindset from medical, he has autism, that's an autistic child. Let's start saying that's a child with autism. That's Maggie. Stop right there, right? You don't need to say, that's Maggie, by the way, she's got autism. Why is it necessary? Label me. Let's leave those labels there and let's focus on the strengths. But those shifting and having those courageous conversations happen slowly, and that's okay, as long as we're starting to have them, and we're realizing that something as simple as a baby gate is yet one more barrier that these kids have to face. And we can't say to you, hey, by the way, I just whipped a chair at your head because I can't get out of that classroom, but I know that everybody else in the school doesn't have one. So being able to really understand what your students' needs, right?
Yeah. Well, these issues aren't alone, as Dan just said to us, and overseas it's happening. It happens everywhere. So I look at the rooms that I have in my school. We have a 5th and 6th grade program and a 7th and 8th grade program. I look at those two lead teachers as the masters of differentiation, not only from an instructional standpoint, but from a behavioral standpoint and from a management of their classroom standpoint. Every second, they could give a clinic on what differentiation looks like to a general ed teacher, to be able to help them understand the scope and sequence of going from A to Z in a matter of seconds. So you're absolutely spot on when you say that. How about if we delve into the point of how inclusion impacts school climate? How is it that, we make sure that all the kids, the 17 kids that we have in this program, are included in everything that we do, whatever it is, whether they are moved, whether they're pushed into unified arts classes so they can be with their peers, whether they're at shows. Obviously, COVID-19 hasn't given us a good opportunity to do that, but I'll tell you, overall, we make sure they're involved with everything. So talk about climate, school climate, and how inclusion impacts it.
For sure. I think first we need to also talk about, what does inclusion look like in a classroom? So for example, if you're putting a student with special needs at the edge of the back of their classroom, so if you picture a classroom, you're entering the door, what is inclusion going to look like in that particular classroom? If the students with disabilities are always sitting at the back of the room where there's an exit, is that really inclusion? And is that really changing that classroom climate, which then impacts the school climate? To me, inclusion means I can walk into a classroom and I can't really pinpoint all those students, right?
Oh, yes, correct.
So I can't say, just like when I run my classroom, my biggest thing is I don't want anybody coming in and saying, oh, she's the teacher. We're all equal. So you shouldn't have to specifically seek me out. You can seek anybody out because they all are highly educated in this area. But to go back to that, if your students are always sitting on the edge, then those students in the classroom are going to think, oh, well, they're not safe. They're not okay. Their behavior is not acceptable. Therefore, my attitude about them is still not going to be that accepting. So then they're going to trickle that attitude until recess, into lunch breaks, into everything that they do. So you shouldn't really be able to kind of see all that, right? Like Dan just said, like inclusion isn't invisible. Like you shouldn't, when you walk into a classroom, you shouldn't have to be able to pinpoint all those kids that are receiving the support. And sometimes that means we're trained to provide the support as a teacher, but what magic could possibly happen when we step back and just let them complete the work and empower them to ask us for support, which then trickles down to the whole school environment, climate. I think completing school climate surveys, for example, having student voice, empowering students to say, what is it that we need to change, starting up student voice committees, and really allowing the students to lead what the issues might be, teachers who are also passionate about this area, and then starting something within your school that you could lead as impactful procedures or policies, or just a shift in a mindset. But I think having everyone's voice involved, it's one of those things we're talking about people, but are those people that we're talking about at the table, right? Whoever we're talking about ever should have a voice at the table that we're having the discussions and the topics about.
You know, one of the things I want to dig a little deeper on if we can. So you're talking co-teaching versus sub-separate. Okay, if you have sub-separate programs meeting the needs, the deep needs of students, and then you have co-teaching going on over here. Now, co-teaching, definitely invisible. You don't want anyone to know who the children are in IEPs. How do you take a child who's in a sub-separate classroom and make them feel inclusive into the school environment? Now, very difficult at times, but at the end of the day, when you walk through a door of a building, everybody's equal, regardless of their disability. So I'm always looking for unique and creative ways to ensure that those 17, 18 kids that I have in my building are included in everything that's going on.
For sure. And I think it starts with, do these students know what their expectations are in terms of how long is the task that I'm doing? What am I doing? And how do I know I'm finished? I think a lot of the behavior occurs a lot when students don't know what's next, right? Like your tasks have to be managed so that your student understands when it's completed, because then they can be empowered to say, okay, I'm done. What's like, have a first then board, for example, first then. But they need to understand what they're doing. So a lot of the times we assume that we just need to give students busy work, or we just need to give them tasks to fill in. Well, same thing as busy work, but they need to also understand of when am I done, so that they can use their communication device, or they can use their PECs, or they can use their words or gestures, whatever form of communication, to signal, Miss Faye, I'm done, ready for the next thing. And then slowly you can just step back and empower these students to not need you so much, because they understand what it is that needs to be completed. But when students are
independence, but when
students are kind of left in this, I don't even know what I'm doing. Okay, I did your 3 puzzles, and then they're looking around. To them, they need to have a sense of accomplishment, right? No matter who you are, you need to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of accomplishment. And that doesn't change with special needs or any other student for that matter.
Agreed.
So for schools that have historically, been, sub-separate schools with minimal inclusivity, in terms of, students with special needs, or learning, special learning abilities versus, disabilities. What can schools do to implement inclusive practices? I mean, you talked about the courageous conversations, you talked about the structural elements inside some of the classrooms. What can we look at, as educators for, school policy development, protocols, et cetera, to really hit those inclusive practices?
And that's a great question. I think a lot of it is, let's not forget the parents in these conversations.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Let's make sure that these parents are involved in the process from beginning to end, because they're their child's biggest advocate. And remembering that when parents come in frustrated, They're frustrated because they're tired and exhausted from continuously advocating for their students. So inclusivity and providing these practices and implementing, let's not forget the parent voice in all of it as well. I think simple things that can start is, for example, what I started in my school, what unfortunately we can't this year due to COVID restrictions, best buddies. Right? Go to your school. Like, for example, when you're walking in the hallway, because a lot of these students need gross motor breaks, movement breaks, however way you phrase them, you usually walk by the same kids in the hallway, right? Those kids who would like to leave the classroom and are out there. What about going to the teacher and saying, would you be okay with so-and-so? They're always in the hallway. They're always saying hi. Would you mind if they came for a walk with me when I'm doing my laps? And then would you mind if one or two of your students came at a certain time every day to do an art project with my students? So that is just a very simple practice that people can put in place. And also explaining to those students that sometimes my classroom may not be a safe environment. So sometimes when you arrive, you may be asked to leave. But that goes along with implementing students with understanding what special needs is and creating more empathetic, caring student bodies. And then in terms of, I think, PD around unpacking your unconscious biases. What is it that really worries you? Let's have these conversations. Let's ask your questions and try to address them and make them practical for you. Are you lacking resources? Are you lacking support? What is it that we can do as a school to support you further in providing these students in your classroom with what they need? And then also really unpacking what does the social model versus medical model look like in your school? Because if you shift your thinking ever so slowly, then you'll start programming a little different, right? Like, for example, putting a ramp in your school is not inclusion. It's a checkbox. So I think when we're implementing, we need to make sure that we're digging a little bit deeper and not just putting checkboxes into saying that we are an inclusive school.
I love Best Buddies. You hit that right on the head. We do that.
Yeah.
I love Lunch Buddies. We do that as well. We have our biggest resource in our school is our kids, and to be able to bring those kids in during a literacy block or during an RTI block, to have them work with our kids in our sub-separate, it's a win-win. The whole room lights up. Our kids just want to feel part of it, and when we do those things, my gosh, it takes off. So let's take a look at the next topic. And inclusion is not a checkbox. You just mentioned that a moment ago. Yeah. Okay, so we're not just checking off things that we have to do. It's the way about which we are expected to do things that matters. So talk about that a little bit and what that might look like.
So, for example, a real life example that's occurring right now in my school is one of my students is feeling just really left out, where I don't have any buddies really to hang out with. I'm striving for social interaction. So we gained permission on all levels to combine with one cohort so he can go outside when they're outside. So check boxes, I could say, done. I've included him in a classroom. Inclusion is done. That's it. Yep. Now, if you go a step further, is it integration or is it inclusion? So integration would be he's just in there. He's with the students, but he's not really with them. Kind of like more like parallel play. He's accessing what they're accessing, but there's no sense of interaction. When they're playing a game, he's not involved. Now, if you take that a step further, if we want to say we're inclusive, he's sharing the toys, he's communicating, we're trying to be engaging, staff is with him. And then we can say, yes, we developed an inclusive approach towards this child being part of a different cohort. Not just, you know what, he's going to join you, but we're going to just let him stay in this corner, which happens, right? Let's face it. Like, if we don't understand what inclusion means, it happens. And that at that point is really integration/segregation, because you're not really taking part in what's occurring in that particular moment. So let's just not make it a checkbox. For example, having, like I said, a ramp. We check box that we have accessibility, but that student is still not interacting anybody that might be somewhere else in that school. They're just entering the building has become easier. Entering might become easier, but the mindset has not shifted yet. So that's what I mean by a checkbox.
So more programs affiliated with access to curriculum and learning rather than tangible aspects of what we do each day. So that makes a lot of sense. So thank you. I appreciate that.
No, I
It
appreciate
does. Your example about the ramp is a great one, and I've been to places, we definitely don't have them here, but, ramp only applicable to, those, in wheelchairs, really?
Yeah.
Anybody should be able to access. Otherwise, we're ostracizing the individuals who need it more. Integrated into a big part of practice. So, you're obviously passionate about what you do, Maggie, and thank you, for
Yeah.
taking on the challenge of being an educator, in the realm that you've chosen. Clearly you're gifted, and you've chosen to write a book called Holloway Connections. So you're a published author and a special educator. Talk to us a little bit about Holloway Connections and what led you to write it, and what are the big idea takeaways for kids?
So what inspired me to write it is just I figured instead of talking at students, if you immerse them in a story which they can relate to, then the messaging can come across that much more powerful. So that right now with coding being, I don't want to use the trend, but with it just being also in the Canadian curriculum now, it's immersed in there as a new thing this year. And something that students really should be learning about with STEM development, I kind of put coding in there so that students can have an entry point towards a discussion. And the reason why I wrote is I really wanted students to be able to relate to what communication means. And the main message of that book is we all communicate differently. So the main character, Lily, uses pictures to communicate. And the boys at the beginning go from a progression of that classroom was weird to, oh boy, she's shaking, I don't know what to do, to realizing, hey, when she shakes, it actually means she's happy. And I'm allowed to ask her how she's feeling. I don't have to bypass her and ask the educator that's standing beside her. I can actually feel that I can talk to her and say, hey, what is this about? But I think that's part of the educator role too that I modeled in the book, where the educator said, don't ask me, ask her. Right? So shifting that dynamic as well. And also on a personal level, I wanted my children to feel accountable for the messaging. Hence their names, Lucas and Liam, are part of the book. And I just figured if they're in it, then they feel empowered, and maybe they can be the change makers in society as well with having a story where they're fully immersed in.
What has written the book done for you? What kind of doors has it opened? What is that, from a teacher perspective, you took the time to write a book that's something you're passionate about. How does that take a teacher to another level?
A podcast like this one, right? A podcast, almost being, I don't like to use the word expert, because when you say expert, I almost feel like your learning is done. And I don't think your learning is ever really done. But it's provided me with the abilities to engage with people on a global level of how to implement inclusion. It's provided people with an entry point, having a book, to be able to have these courageous conversations in their classroom with their students. It's become like that minds-on activity that sparks and ignites those discussions. And it's also opened doors in terms of just my growing PLN and being able to surround yourself with like-minded people.
Yeah, that's outstanding, Maggie. Last year before COVID, I had the opportunity, before the shutdown, I was visiting a 6th grade classroom frequently, and I was reading a book aloud to them, 10, 12 minutes each time I was in there. And it was Sharon Draper's Out of My Mind. And it led to some really rich dialogue with this group of kids, because they were asking very curious questions about the main character, and it was really in an empathetic perspective that they were asking the questions. A couple kids, in middle school way, 11-year-old, asked the question like an 11-year-old would. But the point behind their question was they were really curious because they hadn't been exposed to anybody, with a real significant disability. And that got me thinking that we really need to step up our game. And, in our school district, Dean School has the classroom that's set up. We began an alternative classroom this year in my building for 5th, 6th, and 7th, and 8th grade students with emotional or behavioral disabilities. So we want to be able to expose our kids to a higher level of diversity, with respect to, learning issues. But also we want to pay particular attention to equity and inclusivity along all the other realms as well. We want to talk about race. We want to talk about class. We want to talk about economy, and be sure that everybody understands that they are a part of something that's much bigger than themselves. So thank you for sharing your information about the book Hallway Connections. I think it's going to be something I want to dive into. Certainly, I've got 3 kids here at home. I've got a junior, a 7th grader, and a 4th grader. Certainly something that they could certainly learn lessons from. They're already pretty solid, but it's always good to be able to
everybody has
expand.
their story, Chris. Everybody's
they
got
do.
the right to tell their story and to feel comfortable telling their story. And if your school allows that to happen, then the culture just kind of creates something that's great for everybody. And that's the big step from a leadership standpoint that we have to make sure that happens.
Absolutely. And I think going back to school climate, it's cultivating those relationships and leading as a model and as an administrator, but you need to develop trust and strong relationships with your staff so that you can lead with change, right? You can't just expect to go into your school and say, okay, today we're all being inclusive. You need to unpack that. You need to take little steps in order to achieve it. You can't just expect that this work is done because they listen to a podcast or an interview.
No,
there's no magic wand either.
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every day is a journey. Every day we have a responsibility.
Absolutely.
And if we do what we're supposed to do and do it right, great things happen.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, Maggie, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our evening tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on Unlock the Middle Videocast. We certainly learned an awful lot from you. And we look forward to staying in touch via Twitter. And you're a part of our PLN now, Maggie.
Yay.
So hang on and buckle up because it's a fun ride with us.
Thanks to all the people chiming in too, Chris. I mean, it's great to see people from around the world. From England, from Canada. This is fantastic. And I love to see that because we are all in this together, regardless of anything else. These types of moments give us a chance to expand our mindset and see what other tools are out there. So thank you all for chiming in.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, be good, be well, stay strong, work hard to get better every single day, everybody. We'll see you on Tuesday night with Middle Marvels and not Principal's Perspective anymore, Dean. Navigating Leadership on Friday afternoons.
Absolutely.
Hey, be well, everybody. Enjoy the week ahead.
Thank you.